With the release of Shadow of the Erdtree a few weeks ago, a multitude of bosses have been scattered throughout the realm of Shadow for you to find and fight. Within the DLC, you'll find some of the worst bosses the game has to offer, and by far some of the best From Software have ever made. Today, we'll be sorting and ranking all Legend bosses in Shadow of the Erdtree. For those who don't know, Legend bosses drop a remembrance or equivalent item after being defeated, so the Golden Hippopotamus and the Needlelight Leda and her allies fight won't be listed here. And it should go without saying, major spoiler warnings ahead, footage of each fight will be shown. But enough yapping. One additional note, I'll try to relate the DLC boss fights with other bosses from the previous entries in the Soul series just so you can grasp a better idea on where they stand overall. The sole entry on our F tier, to no one's surprise if you played the DLC, is Commander Gaius. Everything you dislike about bad boss design is all jumbled together and spat out in the form of Commander Gaius. Chock full of annoying hitboxes, there'll be times where you could have sworn you dodged the attack to still be hit instead. Gaius spends a decent chunk of the fight flying and running around, making it last longer than it should. He also has an uninteresting second phase, just making some moves bigger or lasting longer. His arena is pretty bland, and he shares the same OST as the two other commander fights in the base game. Bro didn't even get his own song. To top it off, he's completely optional, which can be considered good or bad depending on how you see it. The only reason to kill him beyond your first time experience is for the 5 Shadow Tree fragments of the Chalice, but past a certain point, those are useless items because they cap out at a blessing level of 20. All in all, he's a doo-doo fight that isn't very fun or rewarding. Other F tier boss fights include the Bed of Chaos from Dark Souls 1. I don't believe there are any other F tier fights, these two in my opinion are far below the rest. Just like F tier, we only have one entry for our D tier, the Shadow Tree Avatar. Decently ahead in ranking compared to Gaius, the Shadow Tree really only suffers from two major points: it's boring and very easy. Luckily, it gains a few points because we never encounter something like this anywhere else in the Lands Between or Realm of Shadow. The fight itself is 3 phases, but each phase is relatively the same, just tacking on one additional move per phase. It settles in D tier because the fight is a breeze, and just like Gaius, lacks any motivation to fight it past your first time playthrough. Aside from its remembrance, the Shadow Tree drops the Broken Great Rune of Mikola, which is an absolutely useless item. I'm willing to bet you'll never actually use this. But luckily for us, these are the only 2 boss fights I would consider bad and not worth doing any more than once. Other D tier boss fights include the Moonlight Butterfly from Dark Souls 1, the Cavacious Demon from Dark Souls 2, or the Witch of Hemwick from Bloodborne. C tier is our most popular grouping with a total of 4 entries within. All bosses within this grouping relatively suffer from the same problems to varying degrees. All 4 bosses within this tier are not really ordered and can be switched around based on preference. I just don't believe they could move up or down the adjacent tiers. The worst of the 4 as far as I'm concerned is the Putrescent Knight. It's one of the few occasions within the DLC where the traversal of the area the boss resides in is more interesting than the fight itself. The Stone Coffin Fissure is, aesthetically, one of the coolest areas in Elden Ring, base game and DLC included. It's very unlike the other zones in the sense that the music dedicated to this area is much more prominent and almost dejected. The area itself feels like someone else's memory. A very unique vibe without being so outwardly different. Leading up to the night, you'll encounter all kinds of enemies, so it's hard to guess the theme the boss will take on, and at the very end of the fissure, you'll encounter a massive drop that leads to the arena, which we've seen a few times before, most prominently the Ivory King in Dark Souls 2, and Dark Eater Midir in Dark Souls 3. The first time I dropped down, I was expecting a fight of similar ilk to the Ivory King or Midir, which are in my opinion both A tier boss fights. The drop itself, I would argue, is cooler than the boss fight itself, as the music fades out and the only thing you can hear is the wind violently updrafting. Now, the Putrescent Knight isn't bad by any means, he just isn't very memorable, challenging, or fun. Fun fact, if you are having trouble dodging his Ghost Flame attacks, just jump. or stay close and aggressive prior to his second phase. You can actually bypass it and kill him outright, or at least damage him so much he'll die really quickly afterwards. The knight is an unfortunate disappointment, but it is what it is. Next up, we have Romina, Saint of the Bud. To me, she's a standard C tier fight. Somewhat interesting design and moveset, but not very hard. If you've played FromSoft's previous titles, she should remind you of Quelaag or the Scorpion Najka, at least design-wise. I actually wish she was more Scorpion in nature instead of the standard woman upper body, bug lower half that we've seen before. Now, the ancient ruins hint at the presence of scarlet rot, with the pests wandering about and the rot itself pooling and infesting some areas. I just don't think the environmental storytelling is strong or prominent enough to fully sell me on the idea of a rot boss here. If the ancient ruins were more infested or had more rot-themed enemies instead of primarily being green and healthy looking, it would help sell its case to me. The third entry within C tier is Divine Beast Dancing Lion. This serves as a good warm-up and introduction to the DLC, as this for me was the first boss I encountered. Cycling between wind, lightning, and ice is a cool touch that thematically adds spectacle and a changing sense of danger to the fight without being overbearing by adding too many moves each time it transforms. I believe each variant grants the beast 2 or so additional attacks. Divine Beast gets some additional points over the Putrescent Knight and Romina because A, his OST is pretty good, and B, he gets a pretty cool cutscene.
O horn-decked beast from higher sphere delivered, take root inside the tower's sculpted keepers, and perched within, we beg of thee, rise. Dance of wood, cleanse and wood. Cruelty, woe, and those who plague the tower. Cleanse away the strumpet's fire.
The last entry within C tier, taking first place amongst these four, is Matir, Mother of Fingers. Thematically and much more uniquely designed than most other bosses, Matir leaves a longer lasting impression. She gains some bonus points over the others due to her being the end of a cool questline involving some rather unique NPCs, as well as her arena being this almost cosmic horror-like vibe straight from Bloodborne. However, she lands in C tier because she is just exactly that, a C tier fight. Definitely one of the easiest fights the DLC has to offer, and how late you can potentially encounter her, most if not all players will just end up steamrolling her if you have the right amount of Shadow Tree fragments. She's just one of those bosses that ends up getting kind of carried by the context that surrounds them, the lore, the arena, the build up to it, but I do think that she gives a better overall experience than the others in C tier. Other C tier bosses include the Gaping Dragon from Dark Souls 1, the Old Iron King from Dark Souls 2, Aldrich Devourer of Gods from Dark Souls 3, or Vicar Amelia from Bloodborne. We now move to B tier. Each boss here and above I would consider great. Very memorable, fun, challenging, and rewarding at the very least. In my opinion, the base game of Elden Ring caps out in B tier. There are very few bosses that are equal in quality and challenge when comparing the base game to the DLC. The DLC absolutely clears.
true great warrior, and I'm gone. Your fears made flesh. Solid of scale you might be, foul dragon, but I will riddle with holes your rotten hide. With a hail of harpoons, with every last drop of my being.
The best Dragon Boss Elden Ring has to offer, Bale takes the cake over Placidusax any day. Everything about Bale is great. His nasty, damaged design, using his wing bone as a piercing weapon or his tail as standing support since he's missing a leg, his arena, the sky a deep red with flashes of orange lightning detailing the background, the lore implications of him and Placidusax duking it out, and an absolute banger of a soundtrack. He's also hard. Bale was the second boss I encountered on my first playthrough and still gives me more trouble than most others in the DLC. He's also the only boss in every Souls game that is enhanced when using the available NPC summon. Egon absolutely tops this fight off. The worst part about Bale, and a big reason for me as to why he's B tier material, is the Jagged Peak, my biggest disappointment of the DLC. All throughout the Realm of Shadow, the Jagged Peak is visible. It stands tall and makes itself seen, almost reminding the player of its presence. Now visually it's very cool. Orange lightning flashes throughout the sky, and the corpses of lesser drakes scattered throughout the level adds a nice touch. But it's so boring to move through. To sum it up, you fight or run past a Drake mini-boss, take a Spirit Spring. Fight or run past a Drake mini-boss, take a Spirit Spring. Fight or run past a Dragon mini-boss, take a Spirit Spring. And you're at Bale's Arena. One of the coolest looking and feeling zones in the game is by far the most trivial and boring to explore and traverse. There's nothing of substance actually going on in the Jagged Peak. Now you may be thinking these issues don't actually revolve around the boss itself, but for me they do. The surrounding context and build up to a fight is just as important as the fight itself. But Bale is still great, and he definitely has the coolest death pose I've ever seen. In the A tier, we only have one entry, the flagship character of Shadow of the Erdtree, Mesmer the Impaler. This boss fight rules. Perfect balance of hard but fair, one of the best boss themes Elden Ring has to offer, great design, and an insane Phase 2 transformation. Mesmer straight up has one of the best cutscenes.
I will not suffer. Our Lord, devoid of light. No, Mother. Forgive me. Soon tarnished. Wilt thou be taken in the jaws? of the abyssal serpent, shorn of light.
There honestly isn't too much to say. An overall fantastic boss and experience. I look forward to facing him every time, and he'll still kill me a couple of times per playthrough. Other A tier boss fights include Gwyn from Dark Souls 1, the Fume Knight from Dark Souls 2, Pontiff Sullivan from Dark Souls 3, and the Lady Maria from Bloodborne.
America, a curse upon thee. Restricted to race of gold shadow, death in the embrace of Messmer's flame.
And now for the S tier entries.
My loyal blade and champion of the festival. Both your deeds will ever be praised in song. Now, the vow will be honored, and my lord brother's soul will return, so that he may be my consort.
Without contest or question, the hardest boss in From Software history and the biggest challenge I've ever faced in the game. In all my time playing these games, this is the only boss that truly stumped me. I spent the better part of a day fighting, dying, and then finally beating him. If anything, Promised Consort Radahn truly humbled me and put me in my place. Now, going in blind, I fully expected Godwyn to be the last boss, as in the base game, the Eclipse implies that Miquella tried and failed to bring his soul back, so maybe he went to the Realm of Shadow to try again. So I was taken by complete surprise until the Ansbach and Freya questline reveals Miquella's intentions. But I am all for Prime Radahn as the final boss, an absolute peak boss fight with few other boss fights in all the Souls games getting close to how fun Radahn is.
Enough. I have endured more than enough. I ask you forgive me, dearest Nanaya.
By a massive margin, my favorite fight in experience was Midra, Lord of the Frenzied Flame. Everything about the fight itself, and the build up to the boss is peak. Now aside from the boss, if you haven't actually gone through the Abyssal Woods, I'll spare you the details so you can experience it firsthand. Midra in the Abyssal Woods is a one-of-a-kind experience. Nothing in any other game can compare. Midra is thematically the coolest boss From Software has to offer, with one of the best, if not the best, OST to pair it with. Not only is Midra my favorite DLC fight, he's my favorite boss in all of Elden Ring and one of my top 5 out of all the games combined. If you haven't already, do yourself a favor and play the DLC.